It was a pleasant summer afternoon in Sydney CBD on the 13th of August 2019. The area was swarming with people, workers carrying out their daily duties and walking to and from meetings, and shoppers trying to find a good bargain. Just after lunchtime, however, the city was thrown into chaos as a man brandishing a large bloody kitchen knife began to run rampant throughout the streets. It was around 2 p.m. that afternoon, and 41-year-old Linda Bowe was walking along York Street. Linda was employed at the shipping company, Costco, which had an office in Sydney CBD. That afternoon, Linda had finished work, and as she was walking down the street, she felt a fierce rush of pain in her shoulder blade, followed by something warm seeping down her back. Linda let out a deafening scream and turned around to find herself face to face with a man she had never seen before in her life. He was wearing a balaclava and was carrying a large kitchen knife in his hand that was covered in blood. His hands were also stained red with blood, and his white shoes and grey hooded sweatshirt had specks of red on them. The man took off running as Linda herself ran into the nearby hotel CBD, clutching tightly to her shoulder blade as blood pooled down her t-shirt. As the man ran erratically through Sydney CBD, he screamed, Allah Akbar, capturing the attention of numerous onlookers. He was swinging the knife wildly, attempting to stab and slash anybody he came into contact with as he bolted down the street. People were swerving away from the bloody blade. The immediate first thought was that the man was a terrorist. Putting their fear to the side, a bunch of men on the street picked up whatever was in their vicinity. Some grabbed chairs, while others grabbed a milk crate and crowbar and gave chase. John Bamford was going about his business that day when he spotted the chaos unfolding. By now, the sound of screaming was emanating throughout the streets, as terrified members of the community ran for their lives. John grabbed a chair and pursued the armed man. He was backing away from him in the middle of the street, but still shouting and waving the knife around. At one point, the man kicks a green bicycle towards John, but he is steadfast in his pursuit of the knife man. Jace Stone was standing nearby. He watched the scenario before him for several moments before springing into action. He grabbed the first thing that he could see, a milk crate, and began trying to apprehend the suspect, or at least prevent him from harming anybody else. A group of firefighters, Gonzalo Herrera, Mike Stewart, Mitchell Bennett and Bennett Gardner followed suit. They had been driving in their fire truck when they saw people running for their lives down York Street.
Yeah, so we were sitting in traffic. We were actually having a bit of a laugh before it all unfolded. And then what we saw next, because I was obviously driving, I was sitting above all the traffic and I was looking down. Could only describe a sea of people just running for their lives. And I saw the man, he had a mask, he was covered in blood, he had what looked to be like a big knife to me. And the first thing I said was, this guy's got a knife. So I just started air horning the truck, and you know, if anyone's ever heard it in the city, it usually scares the hell out of all the pedestrians. So I continued to air horn as much as I could. Realised that wasn't stopping him, so at that stage I put the truck in park and jumped out and ran to the back.
They could see a man covered in blood and armed with a knife. They turned on the air horn to alert passersby to get out of the area, and then put the fire truck in park. They jumped out of the fire truck and ran towards the armed man. The group of men shouted to the man to put the knife down, but he continued running wild up the middle of the road. the man ran on to Clarence Street and launched himself onto the bonnet and roof of a car that was stopped at a traffic light. John followed close behind, still armed with the chair, which he used to defend himself. John followed close behind, still armed with the chair which he had used to defend himself, and to try and stop the armed man from stabbing anybody else. The man screamed that he wanted to die, and urged the men to shoot him before he killed them. Upon realising the dangerous situation, the driver of the car pushed his foot to the pedal, sending the armed man tumbling onto the ground. By now a handful of other men had joined John and the other men, as they attempted to intervene and prevent any more bloodshed. Two brothers, Luke and Paul O'Shaughnessy, and their friend Lee Cuthbert joined in, pursuing the man and trying to keep him away from other community members. The knife man just continued to shout, urging the men to shoot him in the face and shouting that he wanted to die. Working together, the group of men were able to grab the armed man and hurl him to the floor, near Wynyard Park. He was still clutching tightly to the knife, but once on the ground it was kicked away from his hand by Stephen Georgiadis, who had run over to try and assist in the apprehension of the attacker. The group of men were able to keep the armed man pinned down with the assistance of chairs and a milk crate. He screamed that he had a bomb in his backpack, but the men were undeterred. The man didn't struggle as he lay on the ground, his eyes wild and his hands bloody.
Stop! You fucking piece of shit! They're people you just stabbed, you dog! Huh? Stop. Look, I don't kill you right now, cunt. No, stop. Right. You're a piece of shit, cunt.
Wait for the cops.
Paul, give me your phone, mate. You stabbed the chick, mate. You're a fucking dead man inside, cunt. I want to know. Relax. Now you go to civil water, cunt. You're dead.
Wait, can you
take that off?
No, can you just tell us what you see? What do you see?
You just stabbed the chick. You dead broad daylight.
What happened?
You stabbed the chick. Come running down. Oh, I don't know what that street is. He just stabbed people. I don't know. He's got a bottle of pills up there. He's just swallowed a bottle of pills too.
No one touched that.
Up there as well.
What did you do this for?
Bottle of pills that he just took.
Just watch his hands.
Watch his hands.
You've got to have something else. Your keys and
He's not going nowhere.
His hands down. Pocket.
Down his hands. Thank you.
By now, phone calls had come flooding into police from onlookers, who'd witnessed the terrifying ordeal unfold on the streets before their very eyes. They arrived on scene with sirens blaring in just 3 minutes. They found the man still pinned to the ground. One man was using a chair to restrain him, while another was holding a milk crate over his head like a cage. The officers hauled the man up off the ground, put him in handcuffs, and put him into the back of the police van. In here, the man only continued to shout. The knife man was identified as 20-year-old Mert Ney. "24-year-old Michaela Dunn was living with a roommate in an apartment in central Sydney, just a stone's throw away from where the chaos was unfolding. She was home alone that day. As her roommate watched the news on the stabbing, she sent Michaela a text message to see if she was okay and to see if she was watching the news. Michaela never replied. The roommate tried to call Michaela several times, but the phone simply rang, and Michaela never answered. Fearing the worst, the roommate rushed home. She unlocked the front door, and as soon as she stepped foot inside the apartment, she was met by a bloodbath. The lifeless body of Michaela was lying on the floor, surrounded in a puddle of blood. Michaela had been stabbed in the face, neck, and chest. Her throat had then been slashed with such ferocity that it had reached the spinal cord. Michaela had put up a desperate fight for her life, raising her hands and arms to try and fend off her killer. Michaela was a former Rosebank College student in Five Dock, where she was one of 4 social justice captains. She was a dedicated student and a role model to her peers. The principal, Tom Gallia, described Michaela as mature and resilient. Michaela graduated from here in 2012 and then enrolled at the University of Notre Dame in Sydney, where she was studying marketing and public relations. Michaela loved to travel and enrich herself in new cultures. She had just recently travelled to the United States to attend Coachella and had spent New Year's Eve in Sri Lanka. Michaela also travelled to Fiji the year beforehand, where she donated supplies to a rural school. She had always been known for her compassion, and she liked to extend this compassion to those who weren't as blessed as she was. She had a massive soft spot for animals as well, in particular cats. Michaela's best friend Ashley said she could walk into any room and be friends with any person who was there. She had the ability to instantly make any person just feel comfortable. Something else that was strong to Michaela's heart was campaigning against sexual violence and online harassment. She rallied strongly against it, often signing and sharing various petitions online. She was very vocal about it as well, but this wasn't much of a surprise to those who knew Michaela best. See, Michaela was a sex worker, and the money she earned enabled her to travel the world and help to pay her way through college. It also allowed Michaela to live in the heart of Sydney CBD at a $700 a week apartment that she shared with a friend. Before embarking on this new line of work, Michaela had been the duty manager at 10 Pin City, which was a bowling alley in Sydney's west. Michaela's older sister, Emily, had worked here as well, and as soon as Michaela was old enough, she had applied so that she could work alongside her sister. Michaela absolutely doted on her older sister. The pair were inseparable, taking part in swimming, netball, and gymnastics together. Michaela mostly posted her services on Locanto, under the section Men Seeking Women. Locanto is an unvetted classified website, and a number of sex workers use it to advertise their services. Michaela had come from a good family, and she was very close with her mother, Joanne, who had given birth to her when she was 40 years old. Joanne commented that she had waited for the perfect time to have Michaela. While Michaela was out on her own, living in Sydney CBD, each week she visited her mother at home, and she always made sure to leave with a packed lunch. It quickly became apparent that Michaela was the first victim of Nay. Investigators had obtained surveillance footage from Michaela's apartment. It showed Martinez entering at 1:30 p.m. He then left the apartment building at 1:50 p.m., stopping momentarily to take a photograph of himself. He then ran into an alleyway and out onto Clarence Street, where his rampage through the city began. When Nay was booked in at the police station and searched, he was found to be carrying a USB stick in his pocket, as well as a cell phone. When these items were examined, they were found to contain a number of files relating to recent mass killings, including the mosque shooting in Christchurch earlier in the year. His phone also contained a grim video. After killing Michaela, Nay had taken a video of her body and then sent it to a friend.
Look at my fucking hands. Bro, I'm not lying. I fucking look at my fucking hands. My fucking shoes. I'm not fucking lying, bro. I actually fucking did it.
After sending the video, Nay sent a text message to the same friend. It read, "I'm fucking psycho," followed by, "I was laughing, bro. The fear." He then ordered the man to phone police, to which he complied. By first appearances, it looked as though Nay had committed a terrorist attack. In the past 5 years, police in Australia had rolled out a number of initiatives to combat violent extremism. Streetscapes had been altered to prevent vehicle attacks, and mass text message alert systems had also been developed. Police had also been trained to shoot active offenders. However, within hours after the attack, investigators came to believe that the attack was not related to terrorism. Instead, it appeared as though they were dealing with a very different problem. A lone individual who was troubled by mental illness and determined to kill. Police publicly announced that the stabbings were not a terrorist event, and Nay had no links to any terrorist organisations. When he was questioned, he said he had no recollection of meeting Michaela, much less killing her. He said, "I'm pretty sure I hurt someone. Then the next minute, there's chairs on my neck." He explained that he had taken Valium and smoked cannabis before the attack, and said that whatever he had done, it wasn't some terrorist attack. He said that he had intended on being shot dead by terrorism police, but in his words, the Good Samaritans spoiled it. As news of the stabbing swept across the world, Nay's sister, Giselle, would provide a statement which offered some insight into her brother's mindset. She first of all apologised for the actions of her brother, stating, "I want to say that I'm really sorry. All the words that I can say isn't ever going to bring her back, is it? She was defenceless in everything." She went on to say that she now resented her surname because of what it represented, before talking about her brother's mental state. She said that in the past week, Nay had a steep descent into insanity. She said that the family never thought that he would harm somebody else, but they had feared that he would instead hurt himself. Nay had grown up in a brick home in Marryong near Blacktown. He was the son of Turkish Cypriot parents and was the middle of 3 siblings and the only boy. He was a former student of Blacktown Boys High, where he was a good student that was known to keep himself to himself. Back on the 24th of June, just a couple of weeks before the stabbings, Nay had appeared at Blacktown local court for possessing or using a prohibited weapon without a permit. The prohibited weapon was a knuckle duster. Nay pleaded guilty to that charge and was convicted and sentenced to conditional release order for 9 months. This conditional release order required Nay to check into a mental health facility. Around the same time, Nay had begun to express an interest in Islam. He began to frequent the local mosque before abruptly stopping. He commented to some of his friends that he didn't like the people there. He sent text messages to a friend, a gaming friend that was identified only as M.L. Michaela, that he wanted to murder everybody on a Christchurch massacre-inspired suicide mission. Both Nay and Michaela were misogynistic. They had made numerous homophobic remarks to one another in various conversations, and had spoke often about Nay's suicidal ideations. In fact, it was Michaela who Nay had sent the graphic video depicting Michaela's deceased body to. In one text conversation with Michaela, Nay had written, "I hate cops. I want to murder everyone. I've got a hunting knife." In another conversation, he had asked, "What would you do if I went on a rampage?" In another, Nay said, "No one can ever recreate the Christchurch massacre." His comments were more than disturbing, but the friend didn't think to contact police. On the 7th of August, Nay had been at the family home on Percy Street with his sister and mother when he attacked his sister. He grabbed her around the neck, choked her, and then punched her in the face before fleeing. Giselle and Nay's mother immediately called police to report the attack and share her concerns about Nay's welfare. She feared that he could bring harm to himself. Nay was entered onto the system as a be on the lookout for. They were using phone and bank records to try and track him down. At 12:15 a.m, he made his way to Blacktown Hospital after suffering from a prescription drug overdose. It was around 12:15 a.m. Surveillance footage from inside the hospital captured Nay in the waiting room. He could be seen with a glazed expression on his face, staring vacantly into the distance. He throws his head back and then leans forward with his head in his hands. It's evident from his behaviour that he was agitated. An onlooker can be heard commenting, "There's something not right with this guy." According to another patient in the waiting room, Nay was being loud and boisterous, and he was very rude to the nurse and doctors. Nay was involuntarily admitted into the hospital, where he was placed in a secure room. Somehow, however, Nay managed to escape, and he absconded from the hospital. 2 days later, while police were still looking for Nay, he visited his local GP and said to the doctor that he was having suicidal thoughts. After chatting with Nay for some time, the local GP contacted police, as he feared that Nay was at risk of taking his own life. Friends and family were concerned for Nay, but they thought that he was a threat to himself. One of Nay's friends had texted him and said that they were worried he was going to either get locked up or be killed. Nay chillingly replied, "Yeah, I want to die. I tried to kill myself for 2 days. It didn't work." Nay was now essentially on the run from police. Since he couldn't return home, he moved into emergency accommodations in a group home that was run by the Christian organisation, Providential Homes. The organisation was established in 2010 by Cheryl and Warren Ware. As per their website, Providential Homes began with 5 brand new 4-bedroom townhouses in Rudy Hill, and now provides food, clothing and shelter to thousands of people each year across Sydney. They offer several accommodation styles, which included accommodation for single men and women, women with children, youths, and a variety of other family homes. Their model offers immediate short-term accommodation, as well as transitional accommodation. The organisation didn't contact police. After moving in, Nay returned home to pick up some clean clothes. His mother was home, and she knew that police were looking for him for the earlier attack on his sister. He simply left that afternoon, and she didn't think to inform police. Then the night before the attack, 19-year-old Courtney Ridgway and 16-year-old Nathan Tiggy had been staying in the emergency accommodation when they heard Nay discussing terrorism. They described him as coming across as agitated and scary. According to another resident, Nay had told them that he had recently just been discharged from hospital and that he had been kicked out of the family home by his mother. He said that he was homeless, but that he was looking for his own place. Nay woke early the next morning. He sent a text message to an escort service for a 30-minute girlfriend experience with Michaela, costing $250. Before leaving the emergency housing accommodation, Nay grabbed a kitchen knife from the knife block in the shared kitchen. At 1:04 p.m, Nay arrived at Town Hall Station from a train in Blacktown. 40 minutes later, Nay turned up to Michaela's apartment at Unit 23 on 104 Clarence Street. Within 13 minutes, Michaela would be dead. Michaela opened up the front door of her apartment, welcoming Nay inside. She was completely unaware that he was carrying a 20-centimetre knife. Once inside, Nay just stood there. He stared at Michaela for several moments, prompting her to ask him twice if he was okay. Nay never responded to her. He simply pulled out the knife. As soon as Michaela saw the weapon, she began to scream. Nay grabbed Michaela and began to stab her all over. He finally ended Michaela's life using another knife from her own kitchen. Nay then lifted out his cell phone and sent the gruesome video to his friend. From the apartment, Nay exited out of the fire escape, leaving a trail of blood on the stairwell behind him. He dropped the murder weapon and walked into the alleyway behind the apartment complex. He stood there for several minutes, took a photograph of himself, and then put on a balaclava, armed himself with a second knife he had in his backpack, and then began his rampage through the streets. When the public were made aware of Michaela's profession, social media was flooded with victim blaming. People suggested that because Michaela was a sex worker, she had put herself in a dangerous position, and she should have known better. A lot of articles reporting on the case didn't even refer to Michaela by her name, or even use the word woman. They simply referred to a murdered sex worker. Far too often when a sex worker is killed, victim blaming is rampant, as if they have somehow offered themselves up to sexually and physically violent men, and are therefore deserving of whatever violence comes their way. Emphasizing on the occupation of the victim only perpetuates stereotypes of sex workers, completely detracting away from the tragedy and the real issue. Michaela's friend, Joan Westenberg, took to social media, posting, "Sex work is work. She was working. Her job does not make her a lurid story. She was a person, and now she is gone. And she is gone because male violence has taken her away from us." The day after the stabbings, Linda, who had been stabbed in the shoulder blade, was reported to be in stable condition in Sydney St Vincent's Hospital, with Commissioner Fuller commenting that it was a miracle that she was alive. Linda had needed to undergo mandatory testing for blood-borne diseases before she could be discharged. As the community offered well wishes to Linda, tributes for Michaela came flooding in. She was referred to as a delight to know, as well as a whole individual who would be missed and mourned. Her mother, Joanne Dunn, described Michaela as well-travelled and loving, and requested privacy as the family begun the grieving process. The brave men who had stopped Nay's rampage were understandably hailed as heroes. It didn't even bear thinking about how many more victims there could have been if somebody didn't step in to apprehend him. New South Wales Police Superintendent Gavin Wood said, "And I want to acknowledge these people, these members of the public who got involved. They are brave, and I can only use that word seriously. They are significantly brave people. They approached the person with clear evidence of a stabbing previously. These people are heroes, and I want to acknowledge that." John, who had used a chair to intervene, said that he had no other choice. He said to Sunrise, "What am I going to do? Go home and say I could have done something, but I didn't. He wasn't going to frighten me." John commented that he had been reluctant to speak about his actions. As he said, his actions were over-egged, and that anybody in the same position as him would have done the same thing. Paul and Luke agreed. They said that they weren't heroes, but they were still proud of their actions, and proud that nobody else got harmed. Paul commented, "I could see the knife with blood. I was checking him to see whether he had any explosives on him. But Luke was for me. He's my brother. He's my hero. He jumped on him straight away without even thinking any of that process through. And I just analysed the situation in terms of, is there any more attackers? Jace, who had helped pin Nay down with the milk crate, posted his condolences to Michaela on his Facebook. He wrote, "Share a thought for what she would have gone through, the terror she would have felt. She was a person living peacefully in our world. She deserves that respect. I also hope that the actions of one man doesn't speak for all men. The actions of several men taking the offender down shows the majority will stand up against the minority. I, like many other men, do not accept violence to women in any way, shape, or form." The violent incident completely stopped the city in its tracks. As details of Nay's mental health history flooded the media, it prompted urgent reviews into state government health and justice portfolios. The state government knew that there were holes in mental health protocols in the country, and they were acknowledging this. There was a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Communities and Justices, New South Wales health agencies and the police to share information where appropriate, but there were downfalls. There had been for quite a few years. For example, there was no protocol that existed for the Department of Communities and Justice to alert either the police or health authorities as to where Nay was living when he moved into the emergency accommodation. Health Minister Brad Hazard and Mental Health Minister Bronnie Taylor announced that they were going to review each aspect of Nay's care in the state's health system, while Police Association President Tony King said that at first and foremost, authorities needed to focus on stopping the problem before it becomes a criminal issue. He said, "The lack of resources and funding for mental health services needs to be addressed urgently." He further revealed that the association had been calling for years for more support for mental health units. On the 16th of August, Nay was charged with murder, attempted murder, wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, intentionally choking with recklessness, and common assault. Outside of court, his defence attorney, Samari Katis, said that his client was going to be defending those charges. He stated, "He's going through a very difficult situation at this time, but in relation to the allegations, he'll be defending the charges on the grounds of mental illness, and it will be a matter for trial at a later date." Defence Katis had asked the court to make a recommendation that Nay be seen by Justice Health urgently. After Nay was arrested, he was taken to hospital for a leg injury he had sustained during the attack, and Defence Katis suggested that he was not being given his pain medication for that injury when asked. Nay had been given Panadol for his pain, but Defence Katis argued that he needed something stronger. He also said that his client was not being given his medication for his mental illness. 10 days after the charges were filed, Michaela was laid to rest. Hundreds of mourners gathered at Rockwood Cemetery to pay their final respects. Michaela's white coffin was draped in sunflowers, and the outdoor chapel was decorated with yellow balloons. The mourners matched the bright colours by wearing vibrant clothing, as requested by Michaela's family. Michaela was known for her bright attire, and it was a stark contrast to the dreary weather. During the service, Michaela's sister Emily said, "My heart is so full of sadness today, and it still doesn't feel quite real."
My heart is full of sadness today, and it still doesn't feel quite real. Nobody quite understands you like a sister does. Mickey, you're one of the kindest, most fierce, adventurous souls I know. So full of life and love. The world is a much duller place without you, Mickey. I love you so much, and I'm going to miss every day.
She went on to describe her younger sister as curious, loving, hilarious, generous and caring, and said that the world would be much duller without her in it. Emily then announced that she was going to say goodbye to her sister in the way that she knew best, and then read the poem When Great Trees Fall, which was written by Maya Angelou. A number of Michaela's friends spoke before the mourners as well. Her friend Ciara said that they were the lucky ones to have known a friendship so genuine. She said, "We were privileged to have known and be loved by Michaela. Our world has loved someone genuinely, spontaneous, caring, sassy, and true." She said that Michaela never really believed in strangers, just friends that she hadn't met. Before Michaela's body was driven away after the service, Joanne kissed her daughter's coffin. She mouthed the words, "I love you." Her husband Jim put his arm around her as the coffin was taken to the hearse. The grief in her eyes was palpable as the mourners clutched tightly to their umbrellas, protecting themselves from the rain. In October, Nay was hit with more charges. He was charged with possessing child abuse material. The material was found on the USB stick in his pocket. He was additionally charged with possessing cannabis and of being armed with a knife with intent to cause a serious offence. As the prosecution and defence were building their cases, a mental health assessment was ordered for Nay, delaying the case even further. The purpose of the mental health assessment was to determine Nay's competency, to see if he understood the charges against him, and to see whether he could assist with his defence during the trial. The next year passed with lots of legal wrangling taking place. It was evident that Nay's defence team were planning an insanity defence. But in October of 2020, it was revealed that they were now negotiating a plea deal for Nay. Defence Cadiz said that the prosecution had offered them a counter deal. They were needing some time to consider this offer. Just the following week, Nay appeared in court once more to accept the plea agreement and to plead guilty to the murder of Michaela Dunn and the stabbing of Linda Bowe. He also pleaded guilty to common assault against his sister and cannabis possession. As part of the plea agreement, 6 additional charges were withdrawn, including attempted murder, wounding with intent to murder, being armed with intent to commit an indictable offence, and possessing child abuse material. Defence Cadiz commented during the court proceeding that his client was very sorry about what he had done, and that he was going to argue during the sentencing phase that his mental health was a significant contributing factor to the attack. The sentencing phase was scheduled for March of 2021. The prosecution were wanting the harshest sentence, life in prison, with prosecutor Craig Everson writing in a submission to the court, "This was premeditated murder and mayhem." Emotions were high in the courtroom as Michaela's family provided victim impact statements. It was the first time that they had been given the opportunity to address Nay. Joanne was the first one to speak. She stared directly at Nay as she said, "I know our house was very quiet. Very, very quiet. No tears, no shouting, just numbness. No parent should ever have to hear those words. Your daughter has been murdered." Joanne admonished the media for how they covered the case. She said that they were extremely cruel and had stripped Michaela of her identity. Fighting back tears, she said, "They had no idea of the amazing woman she was. I want people to understand that Michaela could have been their daughter. She was just the girl next door." She spoke of some of the things that Michaela had missed and things that she had been robbed of, such as meeting her niece, being the maid of honour at her sister's wedding, and being able to continue her passion of travelling the world. She lamented on the fact that she would never get to hear her daughter say, "I love you, Mum," ever again. Linda, who had since made a full recovery, also addressed Nay. Her victim impact statement was read aloud by a support person. She spoke about the moment her life changed forever, stating, "I dropped like a hunted animal, blood pouring from my side. I screamed for help." Linda was left not only with physical scars but emotional scars. She struggled to return to Sydney CBD after the attack, as it always brought on a wave of emotion. Nay was then given the opportunity to speak. He was asked to detail the attack on Michaela. Before doing so, he warned Barrister Belinda Sig SC that it was graphic and violent. Joanne left the courtroom before he began to speak. He described entering the apartment and lifting out the knife. He said that he began to stab Michaela just to make her be silent. He then stated, "I stabbed her everywhere. Face, hands, arms, chest, leg." He said that he had reached the point of no return after there were 20 or 30 stab wounds to Michaela's neck, before adding, "She was going to die. No question about it." They then said that he was fully committed to his final chapter of being killed by police. He explained that the reason he shouted Allah Akbar as he ran through the streets armed with the knife was because he thought police would assume he was a terrorist and shoot him dead. When Barrister Rigg asked Nay how he felt about the murder, he said that he had destroyed lives for no reason. He stated, "It was all pointless and selfish," before commenting that if somebody ever murdered his child, he would feel as though life were not worth living. Nay went on to speak about his obsession with the Christchurch massacre and other terrorist and mass shootings. He said that one reason for his obsession was because he wanted to understand why his mother was distant, due to trauma she had experienced during the war. However, he then admitted that he wanted to watch the videos because of his obsession with watching really bad acts. He acknowledged that he did not agree with the perpetrator's messages, and disagreed that he had been motivated to kill Michaela as retribution for the victims of the Christchurch massacre. He said that the shooter in that case's manifesto didn't make sense, and referred to him as a joke. According to Nay, he thought about Michaela each night, especially the fact that she had asked him whether he was okay before he killed her. It was now time for Nay to be sentenced.
Would the offender please stand? Mert Nay, you are convicted of the offence of the murder of Michaela Dunn and the offence of wounding Lynn Bowe with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. I sentence you to an aggregate term of imprisonment for a term of 44 years, comprising a non-parole period of 33 years, commencing on 13 August 2019 and expiring on 12 August 2052, with a balance of term of 11 years, commencing on 13 August 2052 and expiring on 12 August 2063. The earliest date upon which you will be eligible for release on parole is 12 August 2052.
Martinet was ultimately sentenced to 44 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 33 years. In handing down the sentence, Justice Peter Johnson described Nay's actions as a violent, terrifying and chaotic rampage. He described Nay as a violent person and said that he continues to be a dangerous person.
This was a cruel, brutal and terrifying attack made for no reason. He took on the trappings, gestures and language of a terrorist. However, the conduct of the offender remains especially grave, even in the absence of this finding.
While the prosecution had wanted a life sentence, the judge had taken Nay's mental condition at the time into consideration. As the verdict was read aloud, Nay showed no semblance of emotion. As he was led from the courtroom, somebody in the public gallery shouted, "Monster." Outside of court, Michaela's sister Emily said, "I'm not angry because there's no point in being angry, but I am really, really frustrated with the system. There were so many times that could and should have stopped what happened on the day Michaela died. There would have been so many opportunities to stop the crime.
There's always going to be a permanently empty spot at our family dinner table, and my little one's going to grow up not knowing how funny and kind her auntie was. We'll always make time for rich experiences shared with the ones that we love, and we'll always prioritise love and laughter in our families.
In June of 2022, Nay was convicted of assaulting an officer at Goulburn Correctional Centre. There had been reports of a minor fire in his jail cell. 2 officers escorted Nay to a high-risk management unit clinic to observe him for smoke inhalation. While there, Nay lunged at one of the officers. He then spat on his face. Nay was sentenced to an additional 15 months in prison. The 2019 Sydney stabbing incident highlighted glaring gaps within the state's mental health system. For a number of weeks, Nay had been in and out of hospitals. At the same time, he was wanted by police. There was a lack of communication between the services, including the Emergency Housing Organisation, that was not required to inform police of who was living there. If just one of these services got in contact with police, then maybe, just maybe, the stabbings would have never happened. In the end, the rampage was cut short by a handful of good Samaritans, just everyday people that put their lives on the line to prevent further bloodshed. Well, besties, that is it for this episode of Morbidology. As always, thank you so much for listening. I'd also like to say a big massive thank you to my amazing new Patreon supporters, Laura and David. If you'd like to join me on Patreon, the link is in the show notes. You can join for as little as $1 a month, and there are absolutely no obligations. You can cancel any time. In exchange for your support, I upload bonus episodes of Morbidology Plus, ad-free and early release episodes, behind the scenes which includes bonus video, photos and case files, and I also send out some merch. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read our true crime articles.